After 35 years of sanguinary struggle for freedom, Korea finally gained its independence from Japan. Although it seemed to the Korean citizens as a chance to start anew, increasing complications troubled the country. Strong foreign nations from World War II began to interfere with the establishment of the newly independent country. An ideological barrier regarding the future government divided Korea into supporters of communism and democracy, thus prompting the inevitable Korean War. The perpetual war not only resulted in the deaths of nearly 5 million civilians, but also resulted in the establishment of two distinct countries within the peninsula, North Korea and South Korea. The evidence of the physical barrier between the two nations still exists, today known as the demilitarized zone. However, the loss of communication and ideas among the partitioned Koreans formed an abstract barrier, which consisted of opposing government, financial statuses, and traditional norms. Decades passed before the two countries finally showed interest in reunification when they began to engage in a series of conferences. Their goal was to result in a negotiation, hopefully. The barrier between the two nations began to disintegrate with efforts in reconciliation from both sides. On September 2, 1945, the surrender of Imperial Japan concluded World War II. However, disorder inhabited the newly liberated countries after the war. Therefore, in December of 1945, 3 representatives from the United States, Soviet Union, and Great Britain discussed the post-war issues in Moscow. Regarding the problems in Korea, they all decided to create a joint commission of the United States and the Soviet Union to help and assist the political, economic, and social progress of the Korean people. In the failure of the commission, the issue was passed to the United Nations, which ordered the specialized commission to overlook Korea's political maturation. Nevertheless, once the communist North refused to abide by the United Nations resolution, and the South formed their democratic government separate from the North, it became evident that two independent countries developed in the Korean peninsula. Only 2 years later, the tragedy between the two nations, the Korean War, consolidated the separation, and the armistice of the war on July 27, 1953, made the 38th parallel of physical division between the two countries. The separation was complete, and a rigid barrier was established between the two countries. Although the two Koreas suffered from the aftermath of the war, the governments felt an urgency to break the barrier between them. The first act of reconciliation began with the assistance of the Red Cross, which mediated the first interaction between the North and South in 1972. Although the total of 23 meetings did not succeed in unification, conferences laid a firm foundation for future political meetings. Soon after, there was a widespread surge of political movements, beginning with the momentous act of South Korea's 13th president, Roh Tae-woo, who declared the South's willingness to cooperate with the North on July 7, 1991. His proclamation was shortly followed by the Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Act, which improved relations by prescribing matters necessary to promote reciprocal exchange and cooperation between the North and the South. In South Korea's presidential term since the start of its democratic government, 2 presidents strongly enforced pro-reunification policies. The first president was 15th South Korean President Kim Dae-jung, who created the prominent Sunshine Policy in 1998. His policy was designed to soften North Korea's attitude towards South Korea. Thus, he warmly reached out to the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-il. His efforts succeeded, and so the two leaders agreed to meet in Pyongyang on June 13, 2000, to take a step closer in dismantling the barrier. The two nations aimed to reach a mutual understanding to develop South-North relations. The summit marked the first interaction between the separated countries since the war. The two leaders firmly shook hands as they envisioned a peaceful reunification. After the Korean War, there was virtually no contact between the North Koreans and South Koreans. Families separated throughout Korea when fleeing in mass crowds to avoid the dangers of the war. However, due to strict border regulations, they were never able to return home. Therefore, in June of 2000, South Korean President Kim Dae-jung reached out again to North Korean leader Kim Jong-il to allow the lost families to reunite. The process consisted of 100 people from each country, being able to meet and see if they could find their lost family member. The day the divided families met in Pyongyang, North Korea, both countries were drowned in tears of joy and sorrow. Most of the people now aged to be an elderly found their loved ones, but others discovered the heartbreaking news of the loss of their families and friends. Inspired by Kim Dae-jung's continuous attempts for Korea's reunification, in 2017, 19th President Moon Jae-in ardently carried on South Korea's preceding presidents' legacies. Therefore, he organized yet another summit with North Korea's leader to loosen the tension between the two nations. The 2018 summit resulted in the release of the Panmunjom Declaration on April 27, 2018, which declared a new era of peace has begun on the Korean peninsula, and it will lead to reunification. President Moon also acted as a negotiator between the United States and North Korea. The two leaders met to converse about the stalemated Korean War and the global issue of nuclear weapons. The declarations have beneficial outcomes by improving inter-Korean relations and lessening the tension between the two nations.
정부 차원에서의 그런 노력들은 정말 우리 사회를 변화시키는 데 있어서 굉장히 중요한 역할을 하고 있다라고 생각을 하고요. 이런 정부는 정부에서 할 수 있는 노력을 지속적으로 계속하고 또 민간에서는 정부가 이런 것들을 할 수 있도록 계속 푸시하고 이렇게 압력을 이렇게 또 이제 시민들이 변화될 수 있도록 그런 노력을 그러니까 정부의 노력과 민간의 노력이 함께 가야 된다라고 생각을 합니다.
While the leaders of the two governments worked to find a compromise, they also focused on uniting their economies. Both Koreas believed that the neighboring countries should prosper along with them. The first offer to help came from North Korea in 1984 when South Korea was struggling with a flood in Seoul. Hence, the North Korean government sent 370 trucks, passing the 38th parallel to provide the victims of the flood with substantial amounts of rice, medicine, and clothes. The aid from North Korea was successful in melting anti-communist feelings embedded in South Koreans' minds after the war. The major cooperation between the governments occurred in 2003 with the Kaesong Industrial Complex. The goal of the project was to provide more job opportunities in North Korea and increase the production rate of South Korean corporations and break the economic gap that formed after the war.
남한에서 어떤 물건을 만들어내려면 예를 들어서 한 2,000불 이상의 노동력을 줘야 된다면 북한에서는 100불 정도면 충분하거든요. 그 정도 노동력이 싸니까 남한의 기업이 북한에 가서 물건을 만들면 그 물건 경쟁력이 있는 거예요. 기업들은 거기서 사실은 물건을 만들어서 해외에 수출을 하거나 아니면 북한에 팔거나 남한에 팔 때 이윤을 많이 남길 수 있었어요. 그럼 결국 그 돈은 남한으로 오는 거니까 남한의 경제에도 도움이 되죠. 그럼 북한은 어떠냐 하면 북한에서의 100불은 어마어마하게 큰 돈이에요. 우리가 생각하는 100불과는 차원이 달라요.
The accumulation of benefits given from both governments of North and South Korea over the years slowly formed cracks in the barrier without either side realizing. North Korea and South Korea have both shown interest in cooperating. For example, in the 1991 World Table Tennis Championships, the two Koreas agreed to unify the national table tennis teams. Although the decision process was long, after 22 meetings, the teams eventually collaborated for the championships. In order to avoid any disagreements, the team used Korea as their country name and they used the Korean Unification flag as their national flag. Although the joint team failed to win the championships, the evident harmony and cooperation between the members proved that there was hope and peace between them, disregarding the physical barrier between them. The effects of the separation of Korea impacted the lives of millions. The pain from losing their families and watching their nation fall apart have prolonged for many excruciating years. The conflict is still ongoing due to the temporary termination of the Korean War and military threats from North Korea. However, acts of economic cooperation, diplomatic ties fixed, and exchange of cultural ideas between the two nations give the Koreans hope of reuniting their families again. Although many years have passed, historical evidence remains of how both North and South Korea attempted to reunify. Despite the various complications that arose, the divided nations are still trying, to this day, to break the barrier between them and hopefully be recognized as one country on the map where sunshine illuminates Korea's future prosperity.